Welcome back to our channel.
Hello everyone.
Thank you for your
Welcome
support.
back to our channel.
All the content I
Thank
create
you for
is
your
purely
continued
speculative and
Let's
based on
find out.
personal
Did
opinions.
Tracy
If you
really
find
do
a
the
video
right thing by
interesting
telling
and
Rita,
helpful,
or was
please
she
support
driven
me
by
with a like
personal
and a
jealousy?
comment. Let's
Resentment?
find out.
If
Will
Tracy's
Joey succeed in his
suspicions are
scheme?
wrong,
Will Bill
is she
be after the
destroying a
political
marriage
seat?
at its most
Will
fragile
Martin and Bill
moment?
fall into
Does
Joey's trap?
Tracy have
In
evidence of
Fairmont
Vernon and
Crest,
Sharon's affair?
power
Who will
is
she
never given
confront
by
first?
pure ballots.
Vernon,
It's paid
Sharon,
for with
or
silence,
Rita?
with
Tracy
invisible
didn't
debts,
enter
with
Dupree's house
secrets
as a
locked away in
messenger.
drawers,
She
and
entered
with
like a
fears
blade
only
sharpened by
acknowledged
weeks of
when alone in
observation,
front of a
nights
mirror.
of questioning,
Martin
and
had
countless
always
moments
believed he
pushed
could
to the
navigate that
sidelines.
darkness with his
By
image
a
control,
nagging feeling that
with
she was
polished
seeing what
speeches
others
and a
deliberately
smile
chose
warm
not
enough
to
to mask
see.
calculating
In Fairmont
eyes.
Crest,
But
where
as
every
the
smile
congressional
was
campaign
valued,
heated
and every
up,
greeting carried a
he
measure
began
of
to feel the
status
ground
and
beneath his feet
truthfulness.
was no
Rarely
longer rock
spoken
but
directly.
quicksand.
But
Every
Tracy
handshake
decided to do
weighed
what
like
she
a
called the
chain.
right thing to
Every
do,
interview
and
could
what
turn into
many
a
others
trial,
would call
where a
reckless,
single slip of
to
the
bring her
tongue was
suspicions to the point where
enough
they
for an
could slaughter
opponent to
most.
deliver a verdict.
Violently, right
Martin
in
wasn't
front of
afraid of
Anita.
competition.
She believed
He was afraid
she
of
was
being
saving a
dragged
woman
into the
from being
light in a way
deceived.
controlled
But
by
deep
others,
down,
afraid
Tracy
of the
also
things
knew
he had
another part
buried.
was guiding her.
Deep,
A
the
part
scars
fueled
of
by
the
resentment
past,
at
the
Vernon's.
times he had been
Constant
soft-hearted
reverence,
enough to
while she
compromise just
remained
once,
outside the gates of
being
their
unearthed
secrets,
as
forced to
weapons.
believe in
And
their
then,
apparent perfection
Joey
as an
appeared like a
unwritten
talking
rule.
shadow,
Tracy
walking
had seen
softly,
Vernon
but
and Sharon
always,
too many times
leaving
then.
cold, wet
Situations that were
footprints on the tiled
unnecessary,
floor,
enough
as
to
if
be
he hadn't
called
come to
mere
play but to
social
take over the
interaction.
chessboard.
Texts vanished
Joey
as
didn't need to
quickly.
threaten directly. He just needed to sow doubt in the right place, like dropping a drop of ink into a glass of clear water. He understood that Martin couldn't stand the feeling of being doubted, because Martin had built his whole life on the image of a trustworthy
man.
So Joey chose the most ruthless method, making Martin doubt himself. He used phrases that sounded like advice but were actually bait, talking about legitimate funding, about political reality, about anyone being bought off if they knew the price, and most importantly, reminding Martin that some battles aren't won by logic, but by exhausting the opponent before they even enter the polling booth. Martin felt a surge of anger, like being slapped in the face, unable to react, because Joey always had a knife in a velvet glove. That anger intensified when Martin realized he couldn't simply eliminate Joey from the game. Joey was part of the Fairmont Crest ecosystem, a door everyone knew about but no one dared lock because too many had walked through it on nights when they wanted to forget who they were. Martin stood between two equally dirty choices: continue pretending Joey was just background noise, or openly confront him and launch a hunt for any clues Joey might be holding. Martin's inner self was torn into thin layers, part wanting to remain clean, part wanting to shatter everything to escape control. Joey saw that crack and began to orchestrate a bigger drama. He understood that to destroy Martin, he didn't need to shoot the candidate directly. He just needed to shoot at the voters' beliefs with a story dirty enough, persistent enough for everyone to whisper in the hallways without anyone daring to say it directly to his face. And for the story to survive, he needed a legitimate face as a counterweight. Bill. Bill is the kind of person who can stand in front of the camera and talk about order, law, family, and responsibility while hiding behind a self-centered, addiction-ridden ego. Bill also possesses exactly what Joey needs: pride. Pride makes people easily provoked, easily drawn into the game just to prove they can. Initially, Bill resisted the idea of running for office as if it were a dangerous temptation, knowing that the political race would expose all the stains, all the deals, all the missteps of the past. But Bill is also trapped in a house where love has transformed into suspicion. Haley, his young wife, always wearing dresses that seem like a declaration of victory, harbors a hunger greater than Bill's fame. She wants power as much as she wants air, wants to be called by a title that sounds like a suit of armor, and deep down, a bitter resentment at the feeling that her whole life she has been nothing more than a man's companion. Haley once saw Bill as a ladder. But after the cracks appeared, after Bill's hesitations and the old shadows returned to haunt her, Haley began to feel that the staircase could collapse at any moment. In her resentment, she conceived a plan to kill Bill, not simply because she hated him, but to prevent herself from being left in the darkness with nothing. That plan frightened Haley, but it also made her feel like she was finally in control. Joey sensed it. He knew not only that Haley was ambitious, he knew that her ambition had transformed into something darker. A desperate desire to escape the control of her own marriage. Therefore, Joey didn't speak to Haley as he would to a woman. He spoke to a wound. He presented her with an illusion. The First Lady of Congress, the powerful woman. A name spoken at banquets where no one dared interrupt. Joey planted a silent question in Haley's mind. If Bill became congressman, Haley would no longer be a woman begging for attention. She would be someone to whom others would bow down for a smile. Haley felt a tremor in her heart, as if she had just touched something she had deceived herself into, believing she didn't need. That tremor was more dangerous than anger, for it created a false escape. And in that very moment, the intention to kill Bill in Haley did not disappear. It was hanging in the balance like a knife waiting to fall. Haley began to rationalize. If Bill became a congressman, she could wait. She could change her approach. She could kill him later. Or worse, Haley began to think, if real power came, she might not need to kill him anymore, but once she entered that world, would Bill still belong to her? Or would he belong to the public? To the mentors? To other women who craved the spotlight? It was this contradiction that drove Haley mad, because she hated most the feeling of being put in a waiting position. She wanted power, but she also wanted control. She wanted Bill to succeed, but she also wanted Bill to be weak, so he couldn't abandon her. Bill, on the opposite side, began to feel torn apart. Part of him was angry with Joey for her brazenness, for the way Joey treated the congressman's seat as a commodity to be pulled off the shelf. But the other part of Bill was provoked by the challenge. If Martin thought he could sit comfortably in his chair and preach morality, Bill wanted to prove that morality was merely a tool, and whoever played it better won. Bill hated Martin because Martin was a reflection of an ideal version of himself that Bill knew he could never achieve, and also because Martin had once made Bill recoil in social confrontations at Fairmont Crest. For a long time, a simmering rivalry had existed between them. Who was more respected, who was seen as an icon, who was the person the community would stand up to when they walked into the room. When the election was brought to the table, that rivalry ignited into a burning inferno. Bill told himself he didn't need a title to prove his worth. But then he felt ashamed to have to say that. Only those who truly craved it needed to pretend they didn't. Bill began grinding his teeth during sleepless nights, staring at the ceiling and feeling compelled to choose. Either stand aside and let Martin continue to shine as the right man, or charge in to seize that spotlight, even if it meant stepping on anyone. Joey stood in the middle, smiling like someone who had just lit a fire and then stepped back to watch it burn. But Joey's play wasn't just about pushing Bill into the race. His trap lay elsewhere, deeper, more insidious. Joey didn't need Bill to win. Joey only needed Bill to do one thing, make the campaign so dirty that Martin would be forced to react. And in that reaction, Martin would reveal what Joey wanted everyone to see: panic, lack of control, and pieces of a dirty past. Joey understood that when a man like Martin was cornered, he could make decisions that he would normally call unacceptable. Joey wanted to create a moment where Martin broke his own principles, because just one such moment would give Joey a story to tell for the rest of his life. He wouldn't attack Martin with a single scandal. He would attack with a story. Even the most moral person can be bought. And that story would protect Joey forever, because when everyone believes that everyone is corrupt, no one will be qualified to expose Joey anymore. Haley didn't fully understand. She just felt she was finally being seen. But at the same time, a new fear began to grow in Haley's heart. If Joey could say those words to her, it meant Joey knew what she wanted, knew what she could do. And if Joey knew, Joey could use it. Haley was angry with herself for revealing her reaction, for letting a man like Joey touch her ambitions like touching a raw nerve. That anger turned into a negative reaction. Haley began treating Bill as if he owed her his life, as if he had to throw himself into the election to make up for all the times he had made her feel small. Bill felt pressured, provoked, and that only made him want to escape Haley's control even more. This opposition pushed them both into a spiral. The more Haley pressured, the more Bill wanted to prove he wasn't being pressured. The more Bill wanted freedom, the more Haley wanted to hold him captive. Martin, meanwhile, began to see subtle signs, like threads from a trap. Rumors spread faster than usual. Eyes at the country club shifted when he entered. Interview questions seemed written to unnerve him. Martin was seething with anger, knowing a hand was at work, but he couldn't point the finger at Joey without being seen as paranoid. This helplessness made Martin even more dangerous, for a man accustomed to control, when out of control, becomes willing to do anything to regain the upper hand. Martin began to consider methods he had sworn never to use, exploiting Bill's weaknesses, distorting the truth, pulling secrets out of the shadows. He found himself on a moral high ground and felt disgusted with himself. But then he thought that the congressional seat wasn't just about power. It was the goal he'd pursued his whole life, a promise to himself that he would be a lawmaker, not someone oppressed by the law. That thought led Martin to justify himself. If he didn't hold on to a seat, Joey would win. And if Joey won, Fairmont Crest would be engulfed in a jungle law wrapped in velvet. Martin began to allow himself to do bad things for the greater good, and that was the moment Joey wanted. The trap became even more cruel when the seemingly random conversation between Joey and Haley wasn't really random. Joey chose that corner, that time, the just right amount of noise in the country club to obscure the words, but also a position where someone could easily overhear. And the person in that position wasn't someone who was uninformed. Donnell, seething with anger over his broken family, the wounds surrounding Doug and Vanessa's lies, had always seen Joey as someone who stole everything: time, honesty, life. Donnell didn't intentionally eavesdrop, but he heard enough to send a chill down his spine. Joey was selling Haley his future. Donnell didn't know the details, but he understood the essence. Anything Joey pushed out had blood on the back. Donnell was immediately torn between two angers: anger at his mother for still being involved with Joey, and anger at Joey for daring to use others as pawns. That anger drove Donnell to a difficult decision: remain silent to protect himself and avoid being dragged into the mud, or speak out to stop the disaster, even if speaking out could destroy those he loved. Donnell didn't want to become an accuser and be seen as a seeker of revenge. But he also couldn't stand Joey continuing to live as if no one could touch him. At the same time, Leslie was like a snake always finding its way into a burning house to pick up the precious pieces. Leslie might not have heard everything, but just seeing Joey and Haley together, seeing Haley's expression change, Leslie knew there was a story to exploit. Leslie didn't need the complete truth. Leslie only needed enough pieces to cause
en explosion.
And if Leslie caught a signal that Haley was wavering, Leslie would use it as leverage to pressure Bill or Martin, whichever way was most advantageous. Leslie believed that in the power struggle, morality was merely ornaments to be displayed when needed. As night fell, Fairmont Crest returned to its elegant tranquility, but within each person, a storm was brewing. Martin sat alone and realized he had begun to think like an enemy, no longer thinking about service, but about survival. Bill looked at Haley and saw in her eyes not just love or ambition, but a hunger that sent shivers down his spine, for he knew that hunger could turn a person into a murderer. Haley looked at Bill and saw him as both a ladder and an obstacle, both a path to heaven and a handcuff. Joey left the country club with a cold sense of satisfaction, for he knew now that nothing more needed to be done. They would destroy each other. And Donnell stood outside, his hands clenched until they were white, for he understood he had stepped into a moment where any choice would cost him a part of himself. If he spoke, he might save a person but destroy a family. If he remained silent, he would become an accomplice in a closing trap. All of this made the atmosphere thick, as if Fairmont Crest were holding its breath, waiting for a small crack. The sound of a principle breaking, the sound of a vow being betrayed, or the sound of a murderous decision made in silence. And at the very heart of it all, Joey had yet to play his final card, because what he truly wanted wasn't Bill winning or Martin losing, but to force one of them into a point of no return, so that Joey could hold them captive by their guilt, turning the congressional seat into a gilded cage and Fairmont Crest into a place where all power passed through his hands, though no one dared to call his name.